It was a crisp autumn evening when the cracks in my world began to show. My wife, Claire, had told me she'd be out with her friends. A casual night of drinks and laughter, or so she claimed. I stayed behind, content with a bottle of wine and an old movie, the familiar comforts of a quiet evening. We'd been married for 7 years, long enough to understand each other's rhythms, habits, and the subtle tells that betray a lie. That night, something fell off. Her voice over the phone had been too bright, her laughter too rehearsed, like a poorly acted play. But I brushed it off, convincing myself not to overthink. When Claire finally walked through the door a little after midnight, her giggle filled the room like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly mussed, and as she leaned in to greet me, I caught the faint but unmistakable scent of cologne, a fragrance that wasn't mine. My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile, playing the role of the oblivious husband. Claire collapsed onto the couch, kicking off her heels with the carefree air of someone unburdened. "You're in a good mood," I remarked, setting my glass down and studying her. "Yeah, it was a great night," she chirped, her voice unnaturally high, her grin a touch too wide. "The girls and I had such a good time. Nothing crazy, just drinks and laughs." I nodded, masking the unease bubbling beneath the surface. Glad to hear it. As the evening wore on, I noticed the subtle signs, her avoidance of my gaze, the way she clutched her phone like a lifeline. Suspicion coiled around me like a snake, but I said nothing. Confrontation wasn't my style, not yet. Instead, I chose to watch and wait, reminding myself that trust was the foundation of our marriage. Or at least, it had been. The following morning, Claire was uncharacteristically cheerful. She hummed to herself as she cooked breakfast, her movements light and breezy. Her phone, however, buzzed incessantly on the counter, and yet she made no move to check it. When she left the room, the temptation became too much. My heart thundered in my chest as I reached for the device, the screen lighting up as I unlocked it with her passcode, a symbol of trust that now felt like a cruel irony. The messages were damning. "Last night was amazing," read one. "I can still feel your touch," said another. My vision blurred as I scrolled through the thread, each message a knife to my heart. They were from someone saved simply as M. Then came the photos, Claire, laughing with a glass of wine in hand, leaning intimately against a man I didn't recognize. The backdrop unmistakably a dimly lit hotel room. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I set the phone back where I'd found it, my hands trembling. Anger surged, hot and venomous, but I forced myself to stay calm. Rage would come later. For now, I needed clarity, a plan. Claire returned moments later, oblivious to my discovery. She kissed me on the cheek and handed me a plate of eggs, her smile radiant, as though nothing had happened. How could she wear that same smile, touch me with those same hands, after what she'd done? Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own home, watching, listening, piecing together the scope of her betrayal. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't a fleeting mistake. Their affair wasn't confined to a single night of indiscretion. It was calculated, deliberate, a series of stolen moments stretching back months. The rage simmered beneath my skin, but I kept it in check. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I turned my energy toward gathering evidence. I combed through her phone, collected screenshots of messages, saved the photos, and even found receipts she carelessly left in her purse. With every detail I uncovered, my resolve hardened and a grim plan began to take shape. Outwardly, I played the part of the devoted husband. I cooked her favorite meals, laughed at her jokes, and even suggested a weekend getaway. Just the two of us. Claire seemed relieved, as though my kindness was absolution for her guilt. Little did she know, the trip would be the beginning of the end. I had planned this moment carefully, each step deliberate, every detail crafted like the strokes of an artist completing a masterpiece. The cabin I booked was tucked away in the mountains, secluded and postcard perfect. Claire was thrilled when I told her. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she gushed about how much she needed the escape, how life had been too overwhelming lately. I smiled, nodded, and packed our bags, making sure everything was perfect. Even my camera equipment, a new hobby I'd recently taken up, came along. She didn't question it. That first night felt almost magical, at least on the surface. We sat by the crackling fire, sipping wine and reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. We danced under the canopy of stars, the cold mountain air biting but invigorating. But while she smiled unaware, my mind was elsewhere, already focused on the culmination of my plan. The next morning, I told Claire I wanted to capture the scenery with my camera and suggested she sleep in. She murmured her agreement, curling deeper into the warmth of the blankets as I grabbed my gear and headed out. But I wasn't shooting landscapes. Instead, I returned to the cabin and set up my cameras, subtly, discreetly, ensuring every angle would tell the story I needed. When she finally woke, I suggested a hike, claiming I'd found a breathtaking spot nearby. She hesitated, her face betraying reluctance, but my insistence eventually won her over. We spent hours wandering the trails. For a brief moment, as we laughed and admired the towering trees, I almost forgot the betrayal that had brought us to this point. Almost. Back at the cabin, her phone buzzed incessantly. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from serene to irritated. "Work stuff," she muttered, dismissing the notifications with a swipe. But I knew better. That evening, I prepared her favorite dinner, a labor of love on the surface. Each dish was plated perfectly, each detail designed to put her at ease. I poured her glass of wine again and again, each refill timed perfectly to keep her laughing and carefree. She didn't notice my calculating gaze. When she excused herself to the bathroom, I took my chance. Grabbing her phone, I quickly sent a single, simple text to M. "Let's end this." Then, I erased the thread entirely, leaving no trace behind. The following days passed as if nothing had changed. Claire's laughter filled the house, but when we returned home, her happiness began to unravel. One afternoon, as she rummaged through her purse, her face went pale. "My wedding ring," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's gone." Feigning concern, I frowned. "Oh no! When did you last have it?" She looked at me, guilt flashing across her features. I don't know. I must have taken it off somewhere." I said nothing, letting her stew in her panic. The ring was gone, of course, hidden by me, a symbol of our vows turned into a tool of poetic justice. The next morning, I left a folder on the kitchen table. It was meticulously organized. Photos, messages, receipts, all the evidence of her betrayal. When she found it, I heard the sharp intake of her breath. She stood frozen, the color draining from her face. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "The truth," I replied, my voice cold, stripped of emotion. "The truth you've been hiding from me for months." She stammered, tears welling in her eyes. Excuses, explanations, desperate attempts to justify what she'd done. But I held up a hand, silencing her. "I don't want your excuses, Claire. I want you to leave." Her eyes widened, the tears spilling freely now. "Please," she begged. "We can fix this. I'll do anything." But my decision was final. "It's too late," I said flatly. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I had already spoken to a lawyer. The evidence I'd gathered ensured the divorce would be swift and decisively in my favor. She'd lose the house, the car, the savings, everything. As she packed her bags, sobbing, I felt nothing but resolve. She had destroyed our marriage, shattered my trust, and I saw no reason for remorse. In the weeks that followed, I moved on, piece by piece. Friends we'd shared distanced themselves from Claire, siding with me once they learned the truth. As for M, he vanished, leaving Claire to face the wreckage of her choices alone. She had nothing left, no allies, no security, no future. One evening, As I sat on my porch, sipping whiskey under the twilight sky, I reflected on everything that had happened. The ache of betrayal lingered, a dull and distant echo. But stronger still was a triumph, a sense of freedom, of reclaiming control. Claire's laughter haunted me no more. In its place was my own, a sound born of resilience, victory, and the sweet, intoxicating taste of revenge.